If a franchise has been running for as long as 2.5 decades, it's bound to have a few missteps here and there. Capcom's celebrated survival horror series Resident Evil is definitely one of the biggest and most beloved video game properties out there right now, evidenced by its enduring legacy. But even it has not been immune to its fair share of stumbles. From the downright terrible to the decent but not quite great, Resident Evil has seen the release of a few games over the years that have, to varying extents, failed to live up to expectations. In this feature, we're going to talk about the ones that stick out in memory the most. Before we go ahead, a quick request. We upload new videos every single day, and your subscription matters a lot. So please consider subscribing and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. With that out of the way, let's begin. Resident Evil 0.
Playtime is over. You and your friends no longer amuse me. Good riddance. Now nothing will stop me from getting my revenge.
Resident Evil 0 came at a time when the series' fixed cameras and tank controls formula was beginning to lose steam. As it was, people were beginning to grow tired of the series' formula, and though Resident Evil 0 tried to spice things up with new ideas, sadly it did not do a very good job. The game is certainly not without its merits. Several aspects of its story are crucial to Resident Evil lore. The atmosphere is excellent, and it does retain many of the strengths and level design that classic RE games boasted. Not to mention, it looked spectacular when it came out. But Resident Evil 0 is also riddled with misguided experimentation. Billy Cohen plays a crucial role in the game, and not just in the story. He significantly changes the gameplay as well. Allowing players to freely switch between him and Rebecca as the two playable protagonists and removing item boxes entirely, Resident Evil 0 ends up almost forcing excessive backtracking down players' throats. Item and inventory management has always been a core pillar of the franchise, but here, it's taken to frustrating lengths. It doesn't help that Billy himself is not a very good character, or that even the game's main villain, James Marcus, is so ridiculously over the top and caricatured in his portrayal that it's hard to take him seriously anytime he's on the screen. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Launching during a period when Resident Evil was going through the worst identity crisis of its life, Operation Raccoon City was emblematic of everything that was wrong with the series at the time. Capcom had moved away from the franchise's survival horror roots entirely, and were prepared to forego tradition for the sake of heavy profits as they looked to turn Resident Evil into an explosive blockbuster shooter. Operation Raccoon City was one such attempt at doing just that, and it was a spectacular failure. Co-op gameplay is not something Resident Evil was a stranger to. In fact, it attempted it quite successfully in the Outbreak games. But Operation Raccoon City was a straight-up third-person shooter, and a pretty low-budget one at that. The game just wasn't fun to play. It was painfully transparent in how it was chasing trends, and most of all, it just wasn't what a Resident Evil game should be. It came with a single-player component as well, but that was best left ignored. Operation Raccoon City may not have been billed as a major new entry in the franchise, so it wasn't like people's expectations were sky-high to begin with. But even so, it ended up being a major disappointment. Resident Evil 6.
What would happen if I...
The world will be a better place!
Merely months after Operation Raccoon City launched, Capcom came out with Resident Evil 6, the absolute lowest point of the franchise, a symbol of everything that went wrong with it in that era. Doubling down on the action-focused nature of its two predecessors, Resident Evil 6 decided to become even more explosive, even more action-packed, and in doing so, completely betrayed the identity of the series that fans had always held sacred. Does it succeed as an action game? Well, sort of. It's kind of fun to play at times, but by and large, it's an absolute mess of a game. The set pieces are ridiculous. The story is full of bad villains who turn into dinosaurs, Deus Ex Machina twists and reveals involving clones, an off-brand Nemesis knockoff, and more. Resident Evil 6 tried to be the biggest game in the series, but surely it went more than a little overboard. Rather than attempting to temper its ambitions with smart storytelling, subtle writing, and good design, it ended up delivering an embarrassing Michael Bay experience that RE fans are sour about to this day. Umbrella Corps. Resident Evil has had more than its fair share of missteps when it comes to PvP multiplayer, but even in that sorry group, Umbrella Corps is a black sheep. Why? Well, because not only is it a terrible Resident Evil game, it's also just a terrible game, period. For starters, a competitive first-person shooter trying to encroach on the Call of Duty and Rainbow Six crowd absolutely does not belong in the Resident Evil series, and I will never understand what compelled Capcom to greenlight this game. That would still have been forgivable if the game itself was fun, which of course, it definitely wasn't. The maps were terribly designed, the cover and shooting mechanics were poorly implemented, the general flow of each match felt confused at worst and boring at best, and all of that combined to result in a game that was so woefully short on active players at launch that even finding a match was an exercise in patience. It wouldn't be an exaggeration, in fact, to call Umbrella Corps possibly the worst Resident Evil game ever made. Resident Evil 3 2020. Let's get one thing right out of the way. The Resident Evil 3 remake is not a bad game, not in the slightest. It's a fun, short romp with some cool action horror gameplay. But that's all it is. Devoid of context, that should have been enough. But this game had high expectations to live up to. Following hot off the heels of the RE2 remake, RE3 could and should have been a similarly excellent game. But not only did it fail to live up to the standards of its direct predecessor, it also failed to do justice to the original PlayStation 1 classic. Nemesis was, of course, the biggest disappointment. Rather than being a constant, menacing threat like Mr. X but ramped up to 11, he was relegated to fleeting moments of pursuer sections and some boss fights. Raccoon City itself felt truncated. Crucial parts from the original game were cut out, most notably the clock tower, while even the parts that were in the game felt a bit too much like they were retreading on what RE2 Remake had done just a year ago. And it was too short, less than 6 hours long, which is never a good thing in a full-priced $60 game. Was Resident Evil 3 bad? Well, no, not at all. But was it disappointing? Very. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on Gaming Bolt, so please consider subscribing, as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.